Hi! Didn't see you there. Just got back from poker night with the James River Monsters, you know. It's always a hoot and holler with them, but I swear Kaluga has a flush every time I play with him. But if I got at him for cheating, he would drag me to Atlantis and back. And I'm trying not to deal with that. I'm trying to avoid that. But that's besides the point. Anyways, I'm here to tell you about Richmond City's water and the water fiasco we've been dealing with. I would say as of recent, but this seems to be a decades-long issue. So we'll get into that. We'll get into all of that. But gosh, where do we begin? Now, I'm a firm believer that information is power. And there's a lot of information to go about when it comes to the whole Richmond water situation. And I think if you're a resident, or even not a resident, but if you're a city resident, you probably care about your water. Now, I'm hoping through this video, I can provide everything in the most concise, or at least understandable way. This expose, I guess, in a way. But I'm trying to make it as easily digestible as possible. So you might get lost in the big words and stuff, but consider this like the ginger ale of exposés. You know, I'm trying to make it digestible for average people. Because obviously, average people have lives and don't have, you know, time like me to spend countless hours researching the whole issue. But the deterioration of our watershed and the deterioration of our infrastructure for our water is ultimately going to lead to the deterioration of us. So I feel like if you care, so I care about this a lot, and I think you should care too. Anyways, sit back, relax, pop open a cold one, spark one up, whatever strikes your fancy, because we're going to get into Richmond City water and why we're in this debacle. In January of 2025, the city of Richmond, Virginia experienced a blizzard within its first week of the year, resulting in a power failure at the water treatment plant. A key bus tie switch failed, resulting in the backup power system failing, causing thousands of gallons of water to spill into the water treatment plant and flood the facility. Various backup systems were used to control the flooding. They also failed, resulting in a complete loss of water production. A boil water advisory was issued, however, most citizens reported not having any running water at all. The issue started on the morning of Monday, January 6th, and was mostly resolved by Saturday, January 11th, when the water boil advisory was lifted and most people had reported plumbing going back to normal. But what happened? Why did so many systems fail at once, and was the water actually safe when it did start going through the tap again? Well, let's start from the beginning. And I mean beginning. The James River was core for survival in the early world. The river had provided drinking water, food, transportation, anything that settlers and native indigenous tribes needed for survival. While initially the James River sprawled into various streams and watersheds across modern-day Richmond, upon the construction of the water treatment plant in 1924, many of these branches were decimated in an effort to focus water towards the plant. The water treatment plant today is a standard surface water treatment plant located adjacent to the James River, consisting of two interconnected buildings, Plant 1 and Plant 2. Plant 1 was initially constructed in 1924, and Plant 2 was built next door in 1950, of course with many various renovations to keep up with population growth. Raw water obtained from the James River is first directed through a pre-sedimentation basin prior to low-lift pumps sending the raw water to each plant to be treated. Chemical coagulate is added to the raw water and rapidly mixed prior to entering flocculation basins and additional sedimentation basins containing inclined plate clarifiers. In other words, chemicals are used to clump up contaminants or litter so the water is easier to filter through. The beefed up water then spills over into gravity filters, pumps send filtered water to chlorine contact basins to provide adequate disinfection. Fluoride, corrosion inhibitor, and a pH adjustment chemical are added before sending the finished water to the distribution system and then throughout surrounding communities. And we'll talk about these chemicals a little later, but for now, all you need to know is they're used to disinfect the water and currently follow legal water treatment standards. When the water treatment plant was initially built, it was providing filtered water to thousands of residents. Today, it provides for roughly 2 million residents in Richmond City and in surrounding counties, while other nearby counties such as Henrico, Hanover, and Chesterfield all have water treatment centers of their own. They were built more recently, and they do receive a portion of their water from Richmond City Treatment Plant. Henrico uses its own water treatment plant, built in 2004, to serve western and central parts of the county, while eastern Henrico and some central areas rely on Richmond's water. This was made in part through a deal agreed upon in 1994, with an expiry date of 2040. Now, this deal, bringing Henrico County roughly a third of its water supply, was decided upon due to a lack of distributional infrastructure. Henrico, being the newer suburban counterpart to Richmond City, doesn't have the piping necessary yet to comfortably reach the eastern portion of its county, which is why they ultimately struck this deal with the city of Richmond so that residents in the east can have access to clean water, while they make plans to expand the newer plant to be able to reach that side of the county by 2040. However, since the January 6th water crisis this year, Henrico representatives are starting to reconsider their deal with the city, following Richmond's obvious failures at the plant. Henrico has invested $50 million already into improving their water system structure ahead of schedule in an effort to become more independent and distance themselves from the disaster that was the water crisis this year. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind back to the groovy years when the James River really started to cement itself as one of the yuckiest rivers in the country. Whether it was blatant disregard for the environment or just pure negligence, a company referred to as Allied Chemical Corporation produced ketone, or chlorodecone. I think I said that right, chlorodecone, a pesticide for ants and roaches. That was manufactured off the James River and was actively dumped into the James River from the years of 1966 to 1975. So we're looking at almost a full decade of a non-biodegradable toxin being dumped into the river, which was only put to a stop until authorities intervened, with employees becoming sick from exposure to the chemicals. This scandal was nationally recognized and was a huge plunder for the city, resulting in a 13-year-long fishing ban while the ecosystem attempted to recuperate itself. But this wasn't the only pollutant to enter the river during this era. Sewage overflow has been an issue for the city for decades, releasing about 5 billion gallons of sewage into the river every year since the 1970s. Today, we've managed to bring that overflow number down to 2 billion gallons of sewage released into the river per year. A small success, but at what cost? You would think an issue that was recognized over 50 years ago would have been resolved by this point, but unfortunately, it's still a struggle for us today. Let's break down the sewage situation a little bit more, though. The Richmond water infrastructure uses a combined sewer system, an older practice. This system involves storm drain water connecting to the same pipes as sewage water, resulting in frequent overflows and pouring out the excess directly into the James River. You know, the place where we get our drinking water. Practically any time there's rainfall, untreated sewage will spill into the river. In July of 2024, independent testing after rainfall showed E. coli levels in the water were 10 times higher than what is considered safe. Rainfall being particularly high in 2018 resulted in a whopping 3.3 gallons of sewage spilling into the river, and this isn't even considering the amount of pollution being inflicted to the river through just simple runoff and littering. Ask anybody in Richmond about the pollution of the James, and they'll almost always have some pictures of trash floating in the water or puddles of a rainbow sheen on top of rocks by the shores. If you leave trash on the ground in the city, it'll almost certainly end up in the waters. To give a fun little example, me and my lovely fiance decided to take a romantic walk on the river and see what we could find just off the surface. We're at the river! We're at the river here. to demonstrate to you guys that it's so pretty and also full of trash and dirt. It's also freshly rained, you know, a reason why the sewage overflows and gets into this shit right here. So we're not touching the water, you know, stay safe, stay healthy, but we're gonna look at it. We're gonna look at it. And the wildlife. What remains? Okay, cut. Gatorade. 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 But citizens knew something was wrong before the failure at the plant. Faults were documented prior to the water crisis of January 2025, as there were numerous calls to action before the dirty water hit the fan. City officials inside and outside the Department of Public Utilities were consistently pushing the narrative that things were fine and going smoothly as ever. One of the signs that something was amiss at the plant was the water quality reports, both the annual internally done water quality reports as well as from independent third-party studies. Federal guidelines for safe water contamination levels haven't been updated in 20 or so years, but health standards have definitely changed. Contaminants found in years prior to 2025 include and are not limited to, and stick with me here because I might butcher some of this, chloroform, which I feel is very self-explanatory as to why you probably don't want this in your water. Bromodichloromethane, a disinfectant that can commonly be used in cleaning of water, but can be harmful for those who are pregnant or have weak livers or weak kidneys. The EPA states that you should have no more than 0.1 ppm in a tested sample. Richmond came out with a whopping 4.03 ppm. Chlorate, another common disinfectant byproduct. Long-term exposure can affect the thyroid and cause nervous system damage in infants. The World Health Organization considers up to 0.7 milligram per liter of drinking water safe for consumption, with the EPA standing a little more strict at a max of 0.21 milligrams per liter. Richmond tested out at 15.2 milligrams per liter. And other honorable mentions that are present, just not in high enough amounts to ring any alarm bells, are haloacidic acids, I think I'm saying that wrong, trihalomethanes, radium, which is radium, dichloroacetic acid, chromium. All of these are known carcinogens. Also PFAs, plenty of PFAs, which is otherwise known as plastic waste. And while they're not high enough to be considered quote-unquote harmful, I feel the presence on their own makes me reconsider the water quality just by my own standards. As many other states have varying levels of contaminants as well. It can vary region to region, obviously. Some people might have more of one thing or another. But if you're curious about your own water quality and you do not live in Richmond, feel free to go to ewg.org/tapwater. They're a pretty good resource. You can use them to look up your own water quality as well. Or just look at the city's water quality report. Up to you. I also use a Brita filter. I think it's better than nothing. I don't think it saves the day, but it's better than nothing. Now, the word fluoride might sound familiar to you, not because of its presence in toothpaste, but its heavy presence in our water as of very recently, though it was not an intentionally made decision. On April 23rd of this year, while attempting to install a new pump at the water treatment plant, something went awry in terms of valve placement, and ultimately, workers accidentally dumped about 6,000 gallons of fluoride into the drinking water supply. However, the Department of Public Utilities and other nearby counties weren't officially notified about this until 4 days later, on April 27th, with an official press release given to residents of Richmond on the 28th, 5 days later, ultimately. A great show of the communication the facility repeatedly displays. Or lack thereof. From the outside looking in, I'd guess the 4-day window of silence was because of two things. One, many measuring devices at the water treatment plant are malfunctional and unreliable, so they might not have been 100% sure as to how much fluoride they might have spilled. And two, that being the actual measured levels of fluoride found around the city and in surrounding counties after the spill never technically passed the legal limit of what is deemed safe to be put into drinking water, even if it was dancing on the line of a health risk. Nobody really truly got an accurate reading. However, something I feel is worth noting is this fluoride debacle is that fluoride being used in the treatment of water is actually banned in multiple European countries, and as of recently, I'm talking this year, 2025, 2 US states have banned fluoride in the water treatment process. That being Florida and Utah, with Ohio on its way to be the next state to take the jump. Commissioner Roberto Gonzalez of Florida referred to fluoride as a neurotoxin, and that studies show it should not be in water. With many arguing that even if low doses are safe, citizens could be receiving their daily fluoride intake through other means such as toothpaste or supplements, making its use in water to be an unnecessary excess with potential negative side effects. Even big name Robert Kennedy, yes, that guy, spoke in an interview in 2024 saying that he wants to continue to push for the banning of fluoride in water treatment. Side effects of too much fluoride exposure can include lowered IQ, impaired neurological function, as well as joint, bone, and thyroid malfunction. While the American Dental Association swears by its effects at preventing tooth decay, with that being their main driver behind their argument, I have my own qualms with the ADA that makes me skeptical. Even the American Cancer Society, who I also have beef with, claimed that fluoride may cause bone cancer, but there's not enough studies that have been concretely backed enough yet to give a solid answer, as it wasn't until 1962 that fluoride became a staple in water treatment nationally. Regardless, going back to our accidental fluoride dump, while nobody came forward to claim any negative side effects of the overexposure of fluoride, there was still a mild amount of backlash because of the delayed communication. Now, since the incident, daily measurements of fluoride have been continuously done at the water treatment plant to ensure safe levels are maintained. But, we'll see how long this lasts, because, we got bigger fish to fry here. Fish of the infrastructural variety. The clearest picture we have to date of the water treatment plant has been through a report made by the EPA in 2022. This infamous report surfaced to the public shortly after the incident of January 2025, but raises questions as to why nothing was done about this report and why the report was not formally responded to by officials until after the crisis had already occurred. This report in particular blew away any prior statements made by officials in regards to safety and the structural integrity of the plant. Conditions were filthy, crumbling, with many makeshift repairs to broken machinery. This 114-page report gave a scathing preview of the conditions of the under-maintained and outdated water treatment plant, which painted a clearer picture as to why operations at the plant were so secretive for so long. The lack of communication from the plant suddenly starts to make sense when you see the conditions workers were experiencing. For starters, there was no emergency procedures put into place or emergency training for personnel on the site. Zero preparation for emergencies, despite the withering away of heavy machinery surrounding the space. Dozens of pieces of equipment were out of service during their 3-day inspection, from water pumps to filtration screens, and many instruments used for measuring water clarity, pH, chemical dosages, and contaminant levels. All those measuring devices were either broken, beyond use, or unreliable. One meter in particular was malfunctioning, and inspectors were told operators were testing a hypothesis of sun interference, leading to the meter being held above water with a piece of plywood on top to block sunlight from hitting the meter, and said piece of plywood being held in place by cinder blocks. Several concrete structures were crumbling and being augmented with several pieces of wood. EPA inspectors reported several loud, abnormal noises from piping and tanks around the plant, as well as noting a significant amount of cracks and leaks surrounding the plant. Various pipes of processed water were leaking, and rather than pursuing repair, water was just pooling on the floor and spilling into nearby drains, resulting in algae growth and standing water inside the building. But it's not just water leaks. You got chemical leaks too. Caustic soda, a pH balancing chemical that is involved in processing of water, was leaking out of a pipe in the structure as well. And I think this one is so quirked up because in the EPA report, we're shown a picture of this pipe that's leaking caustic soda. And caustic soda is an oxidized agent, where it oxidizes when it is exposed to air. So it looks like a large piece of rock candy. Don't eat it. Don't eat it. But I just think it's so quirked up. Now, if you thought it couldn't get any worse, that's where you're wrong, baby. Live wires everywhere. Live exposed wiring all over the place. Now, standing water, algae, rust, plant overgrowth, leaf litter, and various debris is scattered in every nook and cranny of this place. The inspectors found a random uncovered 5-gallon bucket full of oil and water just lying around. I don't know why. I mean, y'all could have like put a lid on it or something at least, but no, it was just kind of there, lying around. Now, here's a picture, right? Another lovely picture that I love. It's water being processed. It's water being cleaned. With it looking like that, you think like, oh, it's clean, right? Like it's white. You know, that's because it is flowing water. It is moving water, and you know, so it should have some level of white to it, right? Like that seems right. It's supposed to be purple with the chemicals added to the water in this image. The water is supposed to appear purple. Now, I don't know about you. I don't really think it's given Barney. It's not really given Grimace or anything. I could be colorblind. I doubt it, but it's supposed to be purple. But, I think it's so quirked up. It's so goofy. But you see how the water was moving in that picture? Water moves during the treatment process, but the speed of that water can affect what amounts of chemicals you should put into it. As it's put in the report, flow is critical to determining chemical dosing. And while many of the meters for measuring flow were unreliable, it is up to the employees to essentially eyeball chemical dosing. Say theoretically, an employee gives the wrong dosage of chemicals to the water, and it's not even entirely his fault because no updated reference material on chemical treatment process were available for the employees to access. A quote from the EPA report states, "System representatives explained that there may be reference material in the operation control room, although it is dated from the 1990s. So we're not working with modern day practices here. Let's keep that in mind. Formal chemical testing, if it was happening, was only done as needed, with no regularly set schedule. EPA inspectors were told the water distribution storage tanks were inspected in 2017. However, official records show that the last it had happened was in 2015. They also found a device with a failed inspection tag from the prior year, so at that time it would have been 2021, with no signs of any changes made to fix the device at that time. And while this report was filed and photographed in 2022, which is almost 3 years from the time of recording of this video, something to consider is the dates. This report was filed from the EPA in July of 2022. The RVA water crisis took place in January 6th of 2025, and an official response to the report was finally made January 8th of 2025 by none other than the DPU director at the time, April Bingham. Okay, now that we've covered kind of the physical dismay of what's going on with the water treatment facility itself, as well as the river itself, I get to the point in the video where I start talking names and stuff, you know, all that fun stuff. Just want to let it be known, I'm very happy, very healthy. Very healthy, very happy. Not looking to go anywhere anytime soon. Just highlighting that. Just want it to be known, you know, that I'm chill. I'm leaving Richmond soon. I'm doing this and then leaving Richmond. I just want this to be known. But I'm completely healthy. I'm happy. I'm very happy. I got plans. I got lots of plans. So if I go missing, it's nothing. It was. So at this point in our timeline, we're at about 2022, 2023. And the city's going to make a big move here. An audit, an internally done audit is done for the Richmond Department of Public Utilities. Now, this is specifically for what was going on in the billing department and what was kind of causing bills to rise. Because ultimately citizens were concerned about why their bills were rising every year, reasonably so. Even in 2019, the city council had aired their own grievances on the rising utility rates. City council member Reva Tremmel stated, "I am getting calls from people who wonder how they are going to pay their utility bills. This is not fair and it's not right." So with prices for utilities outpacing inflation by the double digits, there was a lot of concern from residents for what exactly they were paying for. Now, the 30-page report found 4 major issues that need to be addressed for improvement. Number 1, the backlog of unpaid and late bills owed to the Department of Public Utilities from consumers. Somehow, even with a grant of $21 million from the government for COVID relief, the department's debts have doubled, with a total delinquent bills owing roughly about $60 million. Prior to the pandemic, the DPU billing department handled most late balances by shutting off services. However, since then, they've started sending delinquent bills straight to an outsourced collections agency. There's no process in place to ensure accounts are correct or to track or oversee the remaining outstanding accounts. And with only roughly 40% of delinquent billers paying their installment plans on time, it's apparent that citizens are struggling to pay their bills. Number 2, the major amount of unaddressed service orders in tandem with aging infrastructure. At the time of the report in 2022, there were 47,000 open service requests related to water and gas. Open requests going as far back as 2001, and only about 4,700 requests were fulfilled by December of 2022. That still leaves 42,300 open service requests by January of 2023. And that's one long waiting list if you have any issues with your utilities meters. 3, bill pay is done through a third-party service that makes knowing what you're paying for a more complicated task. According to the DPU adjustment policy, if a reading for a meter isn't obtained within the monthly billing period, they will estimate your cost for that month. And while they try to avoid estimated readings for no more than 3 months in a row, employees can continue to provide estimated bills if adequate documentation is presented. But there's no process in place to manage or monitor estimated bills. And while your estimated price could be displayed in more detail on the letter bill that they would mail to you, it is not easily accessible online. You can easily see your bill cost through a contracted third-party vendor online, but to receive a detailed bill showing your usage, you would have to contact the Department of Public Utilities customer support and then sit on the phone for hours until they finally get to your call and hope and pray that you get somebody who knows what they're doing. Number 4, the assisting payment service, MetroCare, used for those who need to make payment plans for water and heat, Auditors found fiscal discrepancies totaling over $19,000. Now, the MetroCare system rundown is a complicated process, and I'm going to simplify it a little bit, but overall, the whole thing should truly be thrown out and redone. A resident must apply for MetroCare assistance and can be covered up to $500 annually. When applying, this information is registered in the CapUp system as well as the DPU system, and spreadsheets of the information registered from CapUp put against the spreadsheets from the DPU showed about $19,000 of discrepancies, with most of it being from people who showed up on CapUp's filing but were not tracked by the DPU or vice versa. And that's as far as I'm going to go into that, because it really is a confusing, complicated, and convoluted process for both the consumer and the employees involved to try to get them set up. I don't know why they would set it up this way in the first place, if not to make it more difficult for those who need coverage. And while I think I've covered a decent amount, other fascinating finds from this audit are that there are no employee performance measures in the billing department. So in other words, there's no formal reviews done on employees, leaving them with no idea what is expected of them and no standard for managers to hold employees accountable for. The DPU has not set up formal review or approval process or a conflict of interest control for billing adjustments. So in other words, there is not a process to ensure that staff members are not adjusting personal or family accounts, nor are there any adjustment limits, as there are no built-in restrictions on the current software. The total number of estimated bills gathered through the audit was roughly 130,000 over the prior year, with 4,000 of those being for the whole 12 months consecutively. A guessing game that even I wouldn't gamble on. The audit offers 20 different recommendations for the Department of Public Utilities. And while it does state the department was cooperative and concurred with all 20 findings, it does not provide proof that changes have been made since the release of this audit in 2023. They even gave recommendations for the Department of Public Utilities Director and Deputy Director, like on the front page. Easy bullet points for them to follow here. Not long after the release of this audit, citizens created a commission to provide oversight on the Department of Public Utilities, which is great. An individual member actually posted on Reddit like 5 months ago from today for public opinions. But outside of that, and 3 official documented meetings on the Richmond legislation log in 2023, I have not seen a lot from them. According to NPR, they're supposed to submit an annual report on Halloween of every year and are required to meet up quarterly. But again, there's not much on the public records of these quarterly meetings, so I'm not really sure what's going on their side of the forest. But from what I can find, they're mostly environmentalists with the goal of removing the rest of the natural gas infrastructure within the city. And while I'm all for it, we hate natural gas. Unfortunately, the majority of the Department of Public Utilities revenue comes from natural gas. 2022 alone saw a collective revenue of about $200 million from the resource, with wastewater and water making a revenue of $60 million and $80 million respectively. It just doesn't even compare. So they've got their own uphill battle to work with here, and I wish them the best of luck. But then again, another audit was released, this time for the warehouse related to the Department of Public Utilities, where most of their merchandise, well, I don't want to say merchandise, but materials and inventory are supposedly being held. And let me say, these numbers are a little frightening, because with the $19,000 in discrepancies for the MetroCare program from the last audit, that's very daunting. $19,000, that's very daunting. This one, we're kind of getting into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's a little bit more crucial, a little more crucial. Now, the warehouse in the 2024 audit shows critical weakness, in oversight, accuracy, and procurement processes on top of fiscal irresponsibility. $821,000 in inventory purchases were not properly tracked, with $404,000 worth of inventory unaccounted for. $563,000 in inventory stored outside the warehouse is not monitored, creating a risk of loss or misuse. Approximately $362,000 was paid upfront to vendors without goods or services being delivered first. There was also $44,900 in costs to the city for damaged and exposed inventory. Excessive inventory held beyond needed levels resulted in $1.4 million in overstock. 51% of items hadn't been used in more than 5 years, and $100,000 was spent on idle stock in 2023 alone. And in terms of just the physical state of the Department of Public Utilities warehouse, once again, we see no documented policies or procedures guiding operations for staff, no formal inventory count procedures, accompanied by various errors in unit of measurement, inconsistent locations, and mislabeled or unidentified inventory was scattered throughout the building. Just another DPU building that's crumbling under a heavy weight of neglect. So, with all these persistent issues, you're probably wondering, who's in charge? Who's been in charge? Who is supposed to be overseeing this stuff? If recommendations are being given specifically to the director of the Department of Public Utilities, who might that be? Well, we get to our first name here, our first big name, April Bingham. None other than April Bingham is the director of the Department of Public Utilities from the years of 2021 to 2025. And let me tell you, she is not well received, unfortunately, and we're going to get into why. April Bingham was placed into the position of Director of DPU in 2021 by none other than Mayor LeVar Stoney. Considerably the least qualified candidate for the position yet, but is somehow the highest ever paid. While people like to celebrate her for being the first woman to have ever held the position of Department of Public Utilities Director, I say pish posh. It is 2025. Women are everywhere in the workforce, and being a woman is not worth looking past what makes her unqualified. And I say unqualified because, for one, those who have held this position in the past largely have held engineering degrees or have some experience in the water treatment sector. Miss Bingham instead holds degrees in business administration and management and has largely held careers in administration and customer service, with a history of working only 10 months as deputy director in the customer service sector of the Department of Public Utilities and as a deputy program manager for the Washington, D.C. water sector. In other words, she's good on camera and she can say what people want to hear, but she couldn't really do any of the work she's managing on her own. I've always been a firm believer in leading by example, and I'm not seeing anything here that proves this girl could understand a lick of what is going on at the water treatment facility. Here's this fun little graphic too, if you're curious about the directors in surrounding counties. Regardless, she's the highest paid for her position with a record-breaking $183,000 a year, beating the last director at $150,000 a year. With the fumble that is the water crisis, Senator Glenn Sturvant, I'm probably saying it wrong, approached the Senate committee with a proposal to impose hiring criteria for the position of DPU director. As Sturvant stated, he didn't want to get into quote-unquote throwing shade at any particular city officials, but felt the situation revealed a lack of qualifications in certain individuals running the Department of Public Utilities. Yet, the Virginia Senate still chose to block this bill, essentially saying if we put restrictions for hiring in place for the city of Richmond, Other localities would have to follow suit, and Richmond is a special case. So there is no drive to set any hiring criteria restrictions in stone. In other words, everyone still wants to be able to hire whoever they want. Now, remember when we mentioned the deal between Henrico Water and Richmond Water, where Henrico is receiving a third of their water through the city? Well, part of that deal involved regular meetings between the Richmond DPU director, Bingham, and the Henrico DPU director to formally update the Henrico DPU director on maintenance and operating status of the Richmond water plant. Ms. Bingham met up with the Henrico representatives only once in all of 2024, with zero notes nor recordings of any conversations between the two directors. Even during the water crisis itself, a report from the Henrico DPU stated that Ms. Bingham had been texting the Henrico DPU director's landline rather than his cell phone to alert him of the state of the water treatment plant. Now, the water crisis itself was a legendary fumble, just a catastrophe, especially for Miss Bingham. Because only 4 days after water was restored to the city, you would think with somebody in charge of that and, having that legendary fumble happen, that she would step up. In a leadership role, you step up and you start really getting to work and taking responsibility. 4 days after, she decided to turn in her resignation. April Bingham resigned. She resigned. And when the going gets tough, you resign and run, right? Like, that's what leaders are supposed to do, right? So they resign and they run for the hills and they try to save face. No, that's not what a leader does. A leader comes back 7 days later and begs for her job back. That's right. She went back to the city office and tried to get her job back quietly. Now, let's get around for April here for really showing up, doing what a leader does. Right? Yeah. So after that, you would think best course of action, lay low, save face. You've embarrassed yourself publicly. It's not worth it. But no. I mean, relatively, but she goes out and she does an interview with the local news, specifically with reporter Tyler Lane, who I do want to give a quick shout out to, because Tyler Lane, great journalist, supplied a ton of stuff for this. Not like personally, it's just like he's done a lot of stories regarding the water crisis and what's going on about it. And he also does this interview with Miss Bingham. Now, there's a lot to go through with this interview. Not a ton, but enough. But while obviously she's not a good leadership pick for the city, definitely not a good leadership role person, she would be great for the GRTC. She would be great for the bus system. Because in this interview, she throws everybody under the bus. And I mean as many people as she possibly could. But here we have, in this interview, Miss Bingham and Tyler sitting down 2 months after the crisis. So she was quiet for about 2 months. Props for the 2 months. But here we are.
It has been 8 strong weeks that I've been silent, that I've sat by the wayside and I've watched and I've listened, and I've actually experienced and witnessed a lot of misrepresentation of my skills, my abilities, and the events of that day. And so no longer can I sit beside and just wait for others to continue to write this narrative without me being a part of it. The night of the 5th, leading in the night of the 5th and early into the morning of the 6th, we had a weather call because we knew that impending weather was coming our way. And so I had not been briefed about anything going on or any concerns at the water plant or the wastewater plant or any other issues within DPU. It was after that call, that early AM call on the 6th, that I was notified by plant staff, the superintendent, that there was a flood happening at the water plant. And so when I got to the plant, I found a situation that was chaotic. I found a situation that was fearful. I found staff that was scared of the events that were taking place.
April Bingham says by the time she arrived, catastrophic flooding had already filled the basement, which halted water production. The power was out and the computer systems were offline. She says she called in extra staff, including electricians, experts, and engineers.
There were no immediate answers, right? There was planning, right? So we needed to understand what we needed and how quickly we needed it and what we needed it for.
And so when did it click for you that we have a public crisis on our hands that we need to get ahead of?
The plant superintendent asked to speak directly with myself and the deputy director. And he said, we need to consider a boil water advisory at 10 a.m. Immediately thereafter, I contacted my boss to make sure that that information was passed forward. So I knew at 10 a.m. that we needed to move forward with next steps in planning for the region.
Who is your boss?
My boss is Sabrina Joy Hogg.
That's the interim chief administrative officer, the top manager of all city operations.
You wouldn't change anything about how you handled communication?
No, I would not. It sounds like we were not prepared going into the winter storm, and we should have been. And so again, if I'm on vacation and someone is preparing the plant for a winter storm, that is not my job. My job is to ensure that you're doing your job. I'm coming back off a vacation. I should have been briefed on all of that, and I was not.
But as director, wouldn't you have an oversight capacity to check in with your deputy directors and your plant superintendent and say, show me your plan, let me make sure that this is sufficient?
And that's a very valid question. And I will say that coming off a vacation from December the 20th until January the 3rd, I did not check in with anyone to say, let me see your plan.
Do you think you should have checked in?
Well, in hindsight, maybe that's something that I would probably say could have happened. I won't run from that. But at the same token, I am not going to shy away from the individuals that are responsible for doing their job. I recognize that we have put people in positions that are greater than their skill sets. So let me say this, Tyler, when I took the role in December of 2021, there were a lot of fires to put out, right? And the plant at that time was not a fire. Customer service was a fire, natural gas was a fire, stormwater was a fire. And on January 6th, it is unfortunate that I was not aware of all of the coils that were bad, or the bus tie, or other things that have come out of the HNTB report. But I'm telling you the truth. In this role, there is so many variables to consider and to address. And these things are not the sole responsibility of April Bingham.
Now, this interview with Tyler Lane ends with him essentially asking if she has any regrets or if she wants to take any accountability for anything that had happened since the water crisis, before or after, essentially. Just any accountability at all. Any accountability. No. She spills a big old bowl of word vomit just for Tyler to have to ask the question again because she didn't answer it at all the first time he asks it. And she says no. She says no. She says, I hold no regrets. And I feel like that says a lot. I feel like it's really telling, her response to this. Because, you know, whether or not she truly believes that she had no responsibility for this or no, you know, regrets, as she says, ultimately she's in a leadership position. So it's her job, essentially, to take responsibility for what happened. And, you know, it's cowardly in a way. It's very childish to, you know, be in a leadership position and not take any form of accountability or hold any regrets for what happened. Because you're in charge. You know, if something bad happens under management, it still ultimately comes down to management. The same deal happens with the city. I think ultimately we've covered enough about April. You know, plain and simple, this woman reeks of pride in a time where she should be sympathetic or remorseful. I think that's really what gets people upset when dealing with her, you know? But regardless, her LinkedIn hasn't been updated since prior to her getting the job with the city in 2021. I heard it was taken down at one point due to people leaving harassing comments and stuff, or harassing her through LinkedIn. After this, I don't recommend harassing anybody. I'm gonna relay that again at the end. But so it doesn't matter what you did. I don't recommend harassing anybody or going out of your way to harass them. But she's certainly never getting a job with the city again. I would be shocked. I would be shocked if she got a job with the city again. But you know, these people, man, working in government, it's just it's hairy. It's a hairy tale. Now, post-water crisis, the new Department of Public Utilities director being thrown in is Anthony Scott Morris, a former director of water at the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality and a professional engineer with experience in water technologies and nuclear science. Morris took the position after Bingham's resignation. He has a mountain of qualifications and has already been given rave reviews from colleagues as to his accomplishments on the job in the following weeks after the crisis. While I believe the load that this job puts on one individual is monumental, and it can be increasingly difficult to find someone with the capabilities to handle that job, I think Morris is doing a pretty good job so far. He's been very communicative with the board. He's been working with recommendations given to him from the VDH, those on city council as well. Morris is doing a massive public service, and while I have no confirmation on if he's getting paid the same as Bingham was, I believe his incentive to work hard comes for a love for the city and for its residents, not just a paycheck or something to clock in and clock out for. Since his taking office, an after-action report has been issued by the Virginia Department of Health with contributions from outside sources that did a deep dive on what allowed all of this to happen. The final 300-page report highlights that this is not the power went out ordeal that the city paints it as, but a result of years of negligence from the city and upper management, with many sources highlighting that the water crisis was completely avoidable. The report shows a detailed timeline for both the before and after events of the water crisis, with easy-to-read bullet points, summarizations, much easier to read than half of the stuff I've looked at in the process of making this video, unfortunately. Going heavily into detail with pictures, the Virginia Department of Health really outdid themselves on this report, with the governor praising the investigation and pushing to have all the recommendations seen through as to not have a repeat event occur. Now, I'm not going to do a huge deep dive into this document as it kind of covers a lot of what's already been stated, but some things worth noting. A heavy reliance of manual labor existed since automatic systems were busted or often faulty. Department of Public Utilities management and leadership allowed a complacent reactive culture to continue to persist. This complacent cultural mindset increased the risk of the water crisis. The health commissioner mentioned the city started legally diverting funds away from the upkeep of the water treatment plant as early as 2006. Staff at the water treatment plant dealt with flooding on a regular basis, aware of the risks to other equipment it could cause. However, not much could be done with the pumps used for removing floodwaters could only handle about 1,700 gallons of water per minute, but what was flowing in on the day of the crisis was about 42,000 gallons of water per minute. Any emergency response manuals or protocols were only available online and didn't even include information specific to switchgears or filter valve failures, which were the things that were critical during the actual water crisis event. The switchgear tiebreaker that failed was over 30 years old and in only moderate condition, a 2 out of 5 rating. It was not prioritized in capital improvement plans despite its central role in emergency power transfer. And valve control failures had occurred previously in 2021 and 2022, but the root issues were never resolved. This report was released in April of this year, and the RVA website has a tracker following this report with all the recommendations listed, and whether or not they've been followed through on, still in progress, or not started. Now, at the time of this video, we're looking at 14 completed so far, 2 not yet started, and 14 in progress. The Virginia Department of Health estimates a repair cost of $60 million for the water treatment plant. But Mayor Avula proposed a budget of $100 million towards the water treatment plant upgrades, $200 million to replace leak-prone gas pipes, $205 million to address chronic flooding, and $340 million to replace aging sewer pipes. And of course, this proposed budget would include a possible $13 price hike on utility bills, if approved by the City Council, which would in theory go into effect this July. The new mayor has already made it known that it's a priority for him to rebuild public trust, as citizens seem to have developed a long-standing distrust of local officials. Now, a lot of work needs to be done to build this public trust, and a big hurdle is having the right people at the helm. The director of the Department of Public Utilities has been officially replaced, as discussed, but there's also a new deputy director and changes to upper management at the water treatment plant as well. But these aren't the only new hires. The Richmond Interim Chief Administrative Officer Sabrina Joy Hogg announced she is resigning from her position, effective June 6, just 5 months after taking upon the role. While the new CAO will be announced June 6th from the mayor in an effort to build relations with Henrico again, Brandon Hinton, Henrico's County Deputy Manager for Administration, will serve as Richmond's acting DCAO for Finance and Administration temporarily. Now, the mayor said, "When I reached out to the county manager to see if he'd be open to loaning us Brandon for a couple of months, he had absolutely zero hesitation. His willingness to lend a hand and Brandon's willingness to serve his neighbors in Richmond are a great example of what we can accomplish when we work together." This also comes after Jamie Atkinson, the city's Director of Revenue Administration, the official responsible for overseeing the fumbled tax rebate program, submitted her resignation on April 21st, as well as the quiet firing of Richmond's Inspector General, James Osuna, not long after he released a report exposing the city's elections office following claims of improper spending and nepotism against the General Registrar, Keith Ballmer, and his deputy, Jerry Richardson. Now, I'm not going to go into depth about the report regarding the two individuals, as that could be a whole other video, as the report itself is pretty wacky. We're talking upwards of $500,000 of wasted taxpayer money, drinking during work hours, and dismissal of complaints of domestic violence and hanky-panky harassment in the workplace. But that's a whole other mamba jamba. The point is, there's a lot of change going on in the Richmond political sector right now. And as for the water treatment plant itself, the Richmond City website, again, does have a tracker to sort of follow these recommendations, and you can follow that there yourself, for which I'll include the link here. In April, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, halted a $12 million grant through the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant program, something the city had applied to receive back in the middle of 2023, but the status of that grant was quote-unquote in review until the program was unfortunately cut short entirely. In an email from the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, federal officials described BRIC as yet another example of a wasteful, ineffective FEMA program. It was more concerned with political agendas than helping Americans affected by natural disasters. And while state and city officials have already aired their feelings towards the whole ordeal, Mayor Avula stated that he was disappointed in the cancellation, but that none of the plant's immediate operations or work being done to recover from the crisis were affected as they budgeted without said grant in mind. Now, I could see how in like the fine print, like if you really get into it, we don't qualify for any kind of federal disaster relief assistance. Despite this being a disaster, a dumpster fire, if you will, just because of how much is due to negligence, not necessarily severe weather. While the cold is what initially set the water treatment plant into, what it was, or like how it collapsed, essentially, the start of a domino effect, if you will. It's not, we could have dealt with a storm And if it weren't for the negligence, none of this would have happened. So I could see how in like the fine print we wouldn't qualify. Because I mean, you got to keep in mind, you know, the federal government, when have they ever been in a rush to help us at a scale like this or for issues like this? I mean, we got Flint, Michigan, you know, not to bring them up again, but Flint, Michigan, you know, and there's also Cancer Alley, Louisiana, Cancer Alley. They really don't ever seem to be in a rush to fix these kind of issues. So I'm not holding my breath, and neither was the local government, obviously, because, you know, they've never been in a rush to help out, in my opinion, unless you're Israel. Anywho, a few days after the cancellation of the grants program support, Governor Glenn Youngkin announced a U.S. Small Business Administration had made an economic injury disaster loan available to those impacted by the water crisis. So if you want a government loan and you're a small business, go for it. You have until January 9th, 2026 to apply. But I would never in good faith tell anyone to get a loan, especially a loan from the government. So I don't recommend it. But you have options. You know, a loan's a loan no matter how many ribbons you put on it. Also, something to keep in mind, while I appreciate Youngkin being very vocal about this whole ordeal, this whole situation, you know, trying to be involved, while I appreciate that, I do want to keep in mind there could be a little bit of bias here. Or, well, I'll say bias, but he currently resides in the governor's mansion, which is a mansion that is provided to whoever is governor at the time. And it is located in the city of Richmond, within the area where the water, you know, was shut off or halted. So he experienced the no water issue himself. The mayor was our current mayor was a little behind in hearing about the whole water system, you know, outside of just like communication issues. With him, you know, he lives outside of Richmond. So he didn't, you know as soon as one would have preferred, just because of that alone. So let's keep in mind when the governor is like talking about how like this is really important, guys. It's like, yeah, because he's also not getting water. Whoa. Now, the previous mayor, you know, the one that stepped down before we had our new guy come in, Mayor Stoney, he has been very sparse, very careful about anything he's said or anything in regards to speaking about the water crisis. Because, I mean, I'm sure he has his reasons. And, I mean, all I can seem to find so far has been this interview, this podcast episode done with the local news, where he sat down and he spoke for an hour about a variety of topics. The water treatment plant and the water crisis in general, he did touch upon for like a good 10 minutes about it, you know, which is incredible because it's still 10 minutes more than anybody's heard overall. And a lot of people have been questioning him considering he was there for, I believe, 8 years. I could be wrong. I'm gonna double check myself. But 8 years before, you know, the new guy came in. And he was also, as mentioned, the one that brought Miss Bingham to director position, you know, the unqualified one. So many people had questions, and unfortunately, he does not bring a lot of answers to this. You can tell he's speaking very carefully. And part of that is because he is trying to run for lieutenant governor. He's running for lieutenant governor. He's quietly been building up funds for his campaign. We're looking at almost $1 million. So he's definitely trying to look his best right now, talk his best, and it shows. I feel like it shows. I mean, he uses the water crisis kind of as a segue to get into why, if he had a position of power at a state level, he'd be able to secure that funding that would be necessary. It's hard to get upset with him about because this is kind of an issue that's been going on, you know, for a very long time. So you can't pin most of it on him. You can't at all. But you can still certainly pin a level of negligence to it, because you can't just be completely unaware of the situation when you were in office for so long and you had specifically diverted funds to go into that. You also chose the person to be in charge of that. So to an extent, you know, he was aware, you know, you could see that, you could tell that, and, you know, anybody, or at least you'd hope he'd be aware. I mean, the ignorance here is a little baffling, you know. It's very hard to believe that he went that entire time unaware of what the water treatment facility was like. You know, there was never once he went there. It's never once he talked to April to be like, hey, how are things going? And she never thought, like, maybe be honest with it. I don't know. There's a lot of questions. But he's on his best behavior right now because he really wants to be the lieutenant governor. You know, he really wants that position. So you can tell he's watching his words, but Lord knows his involvement, you know. Anyways, I think that's about it. I think I've covered mostly everything. I mean, I'm sure there's a few things I've missed, not impossible. But I have spent about a month on this and I need to make other content. So I'm gonna cut it off here. I hope we both learned something today. I hope we both learned something. All I can say is, you know, do your part, stay involved. No harassment, don't harass people. You know, I'm not saying go riot in the streets or whatever, but keep a watchful eye. You know, these people are here to represent us, and our most important natural resource, in my opinion, is water. You know, I mean, it's the bare minimum, clean water, bare minimum here, guys. So just be considerate. You know, keep your eyes peeled, stay involved, keep up with the tracker. I know I will. You know, I care a lot about the environment and what I'm drinking. So I'm gonna keep my eyes peeled, but you should too. And tell me what happened for you, you know? I mean, I'm thankfully, I don't have a child. I mean, I have a dog, but thankfully I don't have a child or a loved one that was in the hospital at the time of the crisis. Everyone had a different experience for the water crisis. Feel free to share it, you know, in the comments or in email. I think the more people that are vocal about how this affected them, the better. You know, it shows that people care, you know. So that's all I say. Care. If you can. Hopefully I can make another video soon in this long format type. Not at the moment. I don't have anything on my docket at the moment, so feel free to reach out if you have any ideas or if there's anything you'd like me to look into a little bit more. For now, I'm gonna start, you know, doing more streaming, get a little more chill content going, some gaming, you know, etc. I'd like to make YouTube my career. But I can't afford that right now. So feel free to like and subscribe if you can. It's free. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Let people know, you know, let people know that this is going on. I feel like a lot of people don't know the depths of this water situation, and it's important. It's important. At least I think it is. I'll have a link, I'll have a link to a file filled with all my sources, all my links that I used for research and stuff like that. So if you don't want to Google, you know, or do a minimal Google search, if you actually want to dive a little deeper like I did, I'll have that in the description below, where all my sources and stuff like that, I'll have it all out there. There's like mild descriptors for each link, so you don't have to just look at the link. But hopefully that helps you if you'd like it.